Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest edition of Tales from Outer Space. Hope you enjoy. Lecture for medical students on New Galactic Alliance species, humans. Written by Cobalt Sky. Hello, students. I am glad that you are all here, and congratulations on almost completing your final year at the Greater Galactic Medical Institute. Zen took a minute to finish taking the gathered crowd of eager students from the 15 or so species that made up the known galactic community. You might not know me, so to properly introduce myself, I am Dr. Zen. I was part of the first contact team that, for the past 4 years, has been working with the humans on bringing them to our united group. At this, many of the students started murmuring. Zen had expected this. Humans were still new to much of the galaxy and were quite the topic of debate and wonder, due to the fact that they came from Sol 3, a Class 12B Deathworld. No doubt, the stories that they told and that were told to them supported this ridiculous notion. Soon, the room quieted down, and a couple students raised their hand as expected of young and inquisitive minds. Please save your questions for later, as my topic for today will hopefully answer some, and most likely give you tenfold more than you had, as learning about humans usually tends to do. At that, many of the students did their equivalent of a nervous laugh, and those with their hands up put them down. A couple of seconds later, the room was quiet. To start off, it is important that you understand something fundamental about humans that applies in every aspect of their lives. This is that there is no steadfast rule that can lock humans down. There are trends and things that are more common, but there is always something that'll bend or break that trend. The mutters from the room confirmed that many of the students had gathered this from the stories that had filtered to the community about the absolute chaos that humans could bring. That is not what I am here to talk about today. I have been brought here to give advice to all of you and a warning to some. You see, after the usual diplomatic dance, when our people started sharing information with the humans, my medical team noted something unique about their body that sets them apart from all other known sentient peoples. Zen took a moment to look over the group gathered before him, now as quiet as a statue. He knew that they were wondering what further oddity the humans that he was about to explain to them. There is no definitive term for this yet, so please bear with me. You there. He pointed to a particular bright-looking student in the second row back. Can you explain how our nervous system works in layman's terms? Looking confused, the student responded after a second. Our main brain communicates by nerves with the rest of our body and tells each part how to function to keep us alive and perform tasks that we need to complete. Might you ask, do humans not do this? Zen nodded to the student and signaled for them to sit down. In a way, humans still have a system that sends signals to the body to perform basic functions, but he stopped to think of the best way to start explaining the reason for this lecture. You, he pointed to another student, explain to me in detail what your body does to pick up a tablet on your desk. The student stood up and picked up their tablet with a thought for a second. Well, first, I have my left Nevlex muscle extend as the right Nevlex muscle contracts, thus lowering my arm. I tighten my occipital joint and turn my grasper to position to grab the tablet, then tighten my Vonex ligament to grip the tablet, and repeated all the steps 1 through 3 in the opposite order to pick it up. The student seemed a bit confused, as this was something almost everyone could explain, even if they did not know the exact names of the muscles used to perform the task. Exactly. You see, the thing is, if I asked a human to do the same task and describe how they did it, they could not unless they understood how their muscle structure worked and what muscles needed to be moved prior to me asking. This is true for much of the human body. Many of the actions that they take are like their sentient part of the brain hitting a switch and the body performs an action, whereas our brains have to manipulate each muscle individually. Many of the students were looking super confused about this until one lifted their wing when Zen nodded and let her speak. She asked, So, if I asked a human to lift an appendage above their head, they would just think arm up and it would go up? Zen smiled. These students were smart. That is a massive oversimplification, but yes. The only bigger correction is that apparently they do not even have to think arm move up. A part of the brain handles that for them. Then stopped for a second, seeing the confusion growing on all of the students' faces. I know that this is hard to understand, and trust me, I felt the same way at first. The reason that I am struggling to explain it is that the system is so autonomous that the humans themselves had a hard time explaining it to me. That shows just how much of a closed system their motor control is. The first student raised their appendage. Yes. Zen nodded to them. So, what you are saying is that humans operate more like an autoforge, where you request an item and it spits one out, whereas we are more like building that object by hand. Then stopped for a brief second. These students were absolutely top of their classes. Yes, very well put. Now that the basic explanation is out of the way, let me explain how this will affect you working on and with humans. You see, in addition to the black box nervous system, some of their body functions are completely out of their control. The biggest example of this is their heart. It is what they consider a smooth muscle. That is a term for an organ or structure that can and does work with little to no input from the main nervous system. More mutters from the class, and you could hear a couple students quietly discussing how this could be a benefit. So, the human heart, it does react to outside stimuli. For example, if the human starts running, for example, the heart will start beating faster to increase the blood flow to the body. But unlike us, the humans cannot do this intentionally. They can do something to trigger the response, but not control their heart directly. Now, many of you wonder the reason for this. The answer to the question gets more into the overall advantage of the nervous system. Can anyone guess what it would be? Looking around the room, Zen picked up on one of the many appendages that shot into the air. The student eagerly responded. It must provide them with the ability to multitask much more efficiently, as the parts of their brains that we would use for controlling our bodies can instead be used to think of other things. Zen thought that it was a good theory, but the student was thinking too far forward in their history. Good guess, but humans are actually comparatively bad multitaskers versus the rest of the members of the coalition. Anyone else have an idea on the reason for this? And before I pick someone else, consider that the system is something that most every species on Sol 3 has. After a couple seconds of quiet murmuring, a shy-looking student who was being encouraged by the others next to them raised an appendage. Go on, Zen said, looking at them. Well, in light of what you said, it must provide some sort of survival benefit, but I cannot seem to think of what that would be, as it is not more advantageous to have complete control of your body, and thus be able to more precisely react and to avoid any dangerous situations. Now they were catching on. You are correct. This does have to do with survival on their world. You see, in most cases, it would be more advantageous to have more accurate control of one's body. But Terra, as they call it, is unique in that there are so many situations and problems that can arise that most of the time, if a being is to forage, hunt, explore, or reproduce, they will have to expose themselves to a multitude of risks, and thus learning the best way to counter an uncountable dangers that could happen at any given second is not viable. Another student spoke up. So, is it like working at a general clinic versus a specialized care facility? the toolkit for the facility is too specialized to handle a wide range of cases that could come at the clinic. Odd analogy, but yes, that is exactly it. There are other aspects of the system, and like most things with humans, they are both a blessing and a curse. Can anyone tell me how our systems deal with pain and how it affects us? A student in the back stood up to be able to speak to the full room. Well, we can feel pain like most other species, and if the pain gets too much, we can, in simple terms, deactivate the nerve cluster, thus not feeling the pain. But this comes with the disadvantage of losing function of whatever the nerve cluster controlled. As well, if we are in too much pain, it can block or confuse signals our brain is trying to send to a part of our anatomy, making it hard or impossible to use or accurately control. Zen was so happy. It seemed every year the graduates got brighter and brighter. Exactly. A wonderful summarization. As you most likely expect, by now the human system works different. Thanks in part to the autonomy of their nerves, they can still use and control parts of their body that is in pain, way past what we could consider inoperable. They call this ability pain tolerances. A good example of this is that they are still able to move and utilize a limb that has one or several fractures in the endoskeleton. At this, many of the students flashed looks of shock and winced as they could only begin to think of the amount of pain that would cause, and that the fact that they could still use that appendage. Just then, a hand slowly raised, almost like they were afraid to ask the question. If they could use a limb that has fractures, would that not have a large risk of dealing further damage to the limb and making the situation worse? Zen nodded. Yes, and most of the time that is what happens. Now before you ask the reason why, let me explain another thing that ties well into this question. You see, due to hidden operation of their nervous system, humans have comparatively little information about what's going on in their own bodies. For example, if they get hit with something and it causes a small fracture in a part of their endoskeleton, they will feel pain in the area of the break, but will not know for sure that there is a fracture or if the bone is just bruised. The same goes for many other injuries and ailments. Another big one is headaches. If they are dehydrated, their optic nerves are overstressed, or a plethora of things, they will feel pain in their brain, but not be able to reliably know the source. Most frighteningly of all is cancer, as most of the time they can go for years with dangerous growth and not realize it is there. Whereas we would notice the problem in a matter of weeks. Zen took a second to let this sink in before asking his next question. So, why would humans, who, to remind you, have a home planet with some of the most competitive evolution, end up with a nervous system that could not detect problems within their body and can only partially tell what known problems are? A couple of students seemed to think they had the answer, but quickly brought their hand down as Zen assumed they found a fault in their logic. After a couple minutes, a hushed discussion, but no one coming forward, Zen continued. The simple answer is expectancy. Because on Terra the environment is so hostile to early humans that the ability to keep functioning even if they were in pain, as well as being able to react faster by simplifying what the active part of their brain needed to do, allowed them to last longer than our more detailed system. At this point, many students looked concerned, and one lifted an appendage, and when pointed at, spoke. So, what you are saying is that the reason for the human's unique nervous system is that the earliest version of themselves were more likely to be killed by some physical and or environmental factor than the cancer. Zen was pleased at how well this group was handling the alien concept. Exactly. Even in their modern ages, their system may not be universally helpful as ours, except in some specific circumstances. A good example of this is the human reflexes. Some of you may have heard of humans moving out of the way of things that many of us would not have had the time to recognize as a potential threat, and then later saying that they did not ever see the thing that they avoided. This is a prime example of human body just acting and triggering the movements without any thought. Something that is only possible because they do not have the ability to individually control the muscles, and instead their motor control is mostly automated. Just then, a notification popped up on Zen's tablet, an alarm to warn them that the time allotted for this talk was coming to an end. Okay, 2 more things that are important for you to know, starting out with this. Tapping an icon on the tablet, the screen behind him flickered to life. What I'm about to show you is a little bit graphic, but it is an excellent example of both the human body compartmentalized nervous structure, as well as another benefit of their bodies. Tapping play showed the video of a human heart outside of one of their bodies being supplied fresh blood from a tube and pumping away happily, as if there was not sitting in a sterile white box. This is a human heart that is being brought to a hospital for transplant to one of their elders who was having heart problems, and yes, this is real and something that is quite common. The shocking part is the fact that all the heart needs to work is fresh blood, given it cannot last forever in this state. As well as the truth that humans can use, and I don't like using this term, but it fits best here, parts from others in order to keep functioning. Zen let the video loop over once more before turning it off and nodding to a student who wanted to ask a question. Have you witnessed this procedure yourself? Zen chuckled in response. No, I have not, but I have met a human who had this procedure done. The students nodded, seeming satisfied with the answer. Zen waited a second for the room to quiet again before starting on the most important part of the lecture. The last part only applies to those of you who have been gifted with the ability to interface with other beings' nervous systems, thus be able to feel what they do. You need to, under no circumstances, attempt this with a human. We know that this ability lets doctors be able to truly understand what the patient needs. When it comes to humans, forget your ability. Due to the differences in nervous systems, doing so would be equivalent to plugging a delicate medical instrument into a ship's warp core directly. The results may be similar. Thus, it is important to learn how to diagnose humans without using this technique. Luckily for us, over their history, they have developed many methods of determining the sources of their ailments. As well, most anywhere you would be asked to work on a human, there will most likely be a human doctor to assist you. That is all the time I have for today. So you may leave if you would like, or stay if you have questions. Zen was happy to see that after a couple of seconds of silence, not one of the students budged from where they were sitting. This Q&A was most likely going to last longer than the lecture, and Zen could not be happier. End of story. I would just quickly like to thank the T5 channel members and patrons, Caspar Arnholtz, Cam Maxwell, Parky, It's Difficult to Pronounce, Lord Azrakul, and Arcadian.